Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for digital photo, and welcome to this second masterclass video lesson that's going to be taking a look at the pen tool. In the first masterclass video, we took a basic look at the pen tool, using it to create a precise path around the outside of an apple. We used anchor points and control points to position our path carefully around the edge of our subject, before working our way back to our very first anchor point and then joining up our path. We then saved the path in our Paths palette, and then turned the path into a selection, proving that the pen tool is a much more precise tool to use in comparison with some of the other selection tools in the toolbox. We'll be using the same pen tool technique in this second masterclass video, the only difference being that in this video we'll learn how to make paths around more complex subjects. Then we'll copy and paste the selections we make from our paths into our main photograph, to create this, a convincing composite image of miniature model Subbuteo players playing football in a real-life stadium. All the elements that you need to make this final image on my screen can be found in the Start Images folder on the CD. So I'm just going to close down this final image on my screen now and open up the very first photograph that we're going to be working on, which is subbuteo1.jpg. With subbuteo1.jpg open up on my screen, I can now get ready to make a precise path around the outside of this model using the pen tool, just as we did with the apple in the first masterclass video. Select the pen tool from the toolbox, and you'll find it just above the horizontal type tool there, so just make sure you're selected on the pen tool, and then we need to make sure that our pen tool is correctly set up in the options bar. Just make sure that you're selected on Paths in the options bar, and then make sure you're also selected on the pen tool, and then moving across, make sure you've got a tick next to Auto Add and Delete, and then just moving across a little bit further, make sure that you're selected on Add to Path area. We're now ready to zoom into this player, but I'm just going to change my screen mode very quickly by going up to View, down to Screen Mode, and I'm just going to go for a maximized screen mode, and you can equally do that by pressing F on your keyboard. We're now ready to zoom into our player, so just hit Ctrl and plus on your keyboard a few times, and I'm going to zoom in quite closely into this player, and I'm going to zoom in to around 300 or 400%. Holding down on the spacebar on the keyboard enters the hand tool, so we can literally just scroll through the image and then find the edge of the player that we're going to create our path around. Place your first anchor point between the edge of the player and the green background behind. So I'm just going to place my first anchor point just beneath the player's arm, just about there. And I'm now ready to make my second anchor point. Move down a little bit to make your next anchor point, and I'm just going to make my next anchor point in between my player and my background. So I'm just going to click again, but this time hold down on my left hand button on my mouse, which will mean that I can take control of the control point. And as I drag down with my mouse, you can begin to see how the path there is curving around the outside of the player. When you're happy with the curve of your path, just release with your mouse, hold down Alt on your keyboard, and then just click on this anchor point just to remove this bottom tangent line. So now we're ready to make our next anchor point. I'm just going to move up very slightly through my image by holding down the space bar on my keyboard, just moving up very slightly, and now I can make my next anchor point. Hold down with your left hand button on your mouse again a little bit further down, just on the edge of the footballer, just holding down with the mouse and then just dragging it out to begin to curve that path again around the outside of the footballer there. And once you're happy with that curve, just release with your mouse, hold down Alt on your keyboard just to remove this bottom tangent line, clicking on your anchor point, and then just hold down on the spacebar again just to move up through your image. So we've got a curve coming around the other direction here, so that shouldn't be a problem. Just holding down with the left hand button on my mouse again, just holding that down, and just as I drag that down, you can begin to see there how the path is curving beautifully around the outside of my subject. If you do happen to make a mistake with your path, don't worry, as you can easily make a few steps back in your history and start again. It's quite handy to have your history up on your screen as you're working around your subject, so I'm just going to bring mine up onto my screen by going up to Window and then down to History. Time then to continue working down through our footballer, just making this path around the whole of the outside. So I'll just hold down on the spacebar and just move up a little bit, so I can now concentrate on working down the side of my footballer's leg. If you're finding the process of holding down with the left-hand mouse button and dragging the path to the curvature of your subject a little bit difficult, you may want to try the other way of working around your subject with the pen tool. Just like before, add another anchor point a little bit further down on the edge of your subject, but instead of holding the left-hand mouse button down, release it and you'll see that the path appears straight. To curve the path, hover the pen tool over the straight section and click once between our two anchor points to make another anchor point on our path. You can then hold down the control key on your keyboard and then actually just move this anchor point, and I'm just going to bend that out slightly like so, and there we go. I'm bending that path out to meet the same contour of our subject. Now you may be able to see there that my path line is just running slightly outside the edge of my footballer. So I'm just going to add another anchor point by simply clicking on my path, holding down the control key, and then just bending that path into shape. So let's go through that process once more. I'm just going to hold down the spacebar to move down through my image. And there we go. We can now make another anchor point a little bit further down. So I'm just going to make another anchor point on the edge of my subject. I'm just going to click once again inside these two anchor points to make another anchor point, hold down control on my keyboard, and then I can just drag that anchor point out slightly to meet the contour of my subject. If the line isn't perfectly up against your subject, just make another anchor point in between, hold down control, and just drag that inside. And there we go, we've made a beautiful path around that slight edge there of our subject. Don't forget that you can also move the control points off these anchor points at any time if you need to by holding down the control key on your keyboard and then just stretching these control points out so that the path matches the edge of your subject perfectly. So all I'm going to do now is continue making my path around the edge of my player, and I'm just going to continue working around using the hand tool and the pen tool to make a really precise path around the outside of my subject. When you get to the bottom of your player, don't worry about making the path around the shadow of the player. We're only looking to make the path around the outside of this plastic area, this blue area. So when you make your path, just run it around the outside. Don't contain the shadow because we're going to make a shadow later in our final image. So just run your path around the outside edge of the perimeter and then back up around your outside of your player and then come back around, and I'll join you in a minute when I'm ready to join up my path. I've taken about 20 minutes or so to work my path around the outside of my subject, and as you can see I'm getting much closer to the very first anchor point that I made. So I'm just going to make a few more anchor points and then join up my path. So again I'll just make another anchor point a little bit further on in between my subject and the background. I'm just going to make another anchor point in between, holding down control on my keyboard. I can just bend that anchor point into shape. And then I'm just going to make another anchor point on that path line there, and just going to hold down control again and just bend that out very slightly, and then make another anchor point a little bit further up, holding down, making another anchor point in between that line there, and then holding down with control, just bending that into shape, and now I'm ready to join up my path. So all I'm going to do to join up my path is I'm very simply just going to hover over the very first anchor point that we made. You'll begin to see there that we've got a little 0 next to the pen tool cursor, and just click that. And there we go, our path has been joined up. Let's now zoom out and take a look at our path. So I'm just going to press Ctrl and minus on my keyboard a few times, and there we go, we can see our path running beautifully around the outside of this football player. The next stage involves making a path in this small area in between the player's legs. This is so that when we take this footballer, copy and paste him into our main final football stadium image, any grass beneath his legs in this gap right here will show through. Before we make the path in between the footballer's legs, it's important that you just go up to your options bar and then just click on this small little icon here, which is exclude overlapping path areas. Just give that a click. We can now zoom back into our image and make this path around the inside of this player's legs. So I'm just going to hit down Ctrl and plus on my keyboard a few times, holding down with my hand on the space bar to enter the hand tool, and then we're just going to make a path around this area here, the inside of the footballer's legs. When you're happy with your path around the inside of the footballer's legs, just click on the very first anchor point that you made just to join up the path, and then we need to zoom out by pressing Ctrl and minus on our keyboard. Our next step is to save the path, and save all that hard work that we've done with the pen tool. So just go up to Window in your menu bar and then scroll all the way down to Paths, and this will load up your Paths palette. To actually save our path, we can just double click on Work Path, which loads up the Save Path dialog box, and just type in Player Path. Hit OK, and our path has been saved in our Paths palette. So with our path made and saved, we can now turn it into a selection. There are two ways of doing this. You can go down to the bottom of your Paths palette and click on the third icon from the left, which is Load Path as a Selection, or equally, you can just go into your palette options and then choose Make Selection from the list. Go for a feather radius of 0 pixels, hit OK, and there we go, we can see the marching ants there around the outside of our subject. We can now copy this selection before we take it across and place it in our main football stadium image. So to copy our selection, we just need to go up to Edit in the menu bar and then down to Copy, or equally you can press the keyboard shortcut, which is Ctrl+C. I can now return to my normal screen mode, so I'm just going to go up to View in the menu bar, down to Screen Mode, and then just click on Standard Screen Mode. For the meantime, we're all done with Subbuteo1.jpg. As we've made our path around the outside, we've saved our path, and we've turned it into a selection which we've copied. So I'm just going to minimize Subbuteo1.jpg down to the bottom of my screen, and I'm now going to open up my main image that we're going to be working on, which is footballground.jpg. So just go into the Start Images on the CD, find footballground.jpg, and load this up into Photoshop. Once you've got footballground.jpg open up on your screen, make sure that you can see your Layers palette. And if you can't see your Layers palette, just go up to Window, go down, and just click on Layers. We can now paste the selection of Subbuteo1.jpg into our main footballground.jpg image. To do this, just go up to Edit in the menu bar, go down and click on Paste. You'll notice how your Subbuteo player pops up onto your screen, but I'm not quite happy with his positioning at the moment, so I'm just going to move him into place with the Move tool. So just go across into your toolbox, pick out the Move tool, and then just move this player into position. The model player is looking rather big as well at the moment, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm selected on Layer 1 in my Layers palette, and then hit Ctrl and T on my keyboard to enter the Free Transform tool. Holding down with Shift on my keyboard, I'm just going to drag down from the top right, and this will keep the player in proportion as I just downsize him very slightly. And then when you're happy with your sizing of your player, and just move him into the correct position, I think he wants to be a little bit about there, just downsize it very slightly, there we go, I think that's looking quite good. To actually apply that transformation, just hit Enter on your keyboard. It's always a good idea to rename your layers in your Layers palette so you know exactly which layer is which. So I'm just going to rename this layer, Layer 1, by just double clicking on the Layer 1 there, and I'm just going to call him Player Number 1. And then just hit Enter, and there we go, we've renamed that layer. Now at the moment our player is looking very realistic in the image in this football stadium, but what we can do is we can actually add a shadow underneath this little model so it actually looks like he was there when I took the photograph. If we just have a look at another shadow in our image just behind this football dugout right here, we can see that the shadow is actually peeling off towards the left hand side. So what we need to do now is create a shadow for this player that comes off just towards the left. To make a shadow for your players, just go up to Layer in your menu bar, go down to New, and go across and just click on Layer. And we're just going to make a new layer, and we can see it there, and it's arrived in our Layers palette. I'm just going to rename this layer in my Layers palette so we know exactly what it's going to be. So I'm just going to double click on the Layer 1 there, just to rename it, and I'm just going to call this layer Shadow. Once you've renamed that layer as the Shadow layer, just click on your Player 1 layer, and then hold down Control on your keyboard, and then click on the layer thumbnail, and that will bring up the marching ants around your Subbuteo player. Now, just go back to your shadow layer and make sure that that is selected. And then we need to go up to Edit in the menu bar, and then down to Fill. Make sure that your contents is set to black. And then moving down, make sure your blending and your mode is set to normal, and the opacity is set to 100%. Then just hit OK. You may have noticed that our Subbuteo player on our football ground is actually turned completely black. But don't worry, we're going to sort that out right now. But first of all, we need to deselect those marching ants on our shadow layer, and we can do that by hitting Ctrl and D on the keyboard. To make sure that we can see our Subbuteo player again, we just need to move our shadow layer underneath our player 1 layer. To do that, I'm just going to hold down with my left hand mouse button on my shadow layer, and I'm just going to drag that underneath my player 1 layer, let go, and there we go, we can see our player 1 once again. We're now ready to make our shadow for this player, so make sure that you're selected on your shadow layer in your layers palette, and then hit Ctrl and T on your keyboard again to enter free transform. We're now ready to adjust our shadow, so I'm just going to hold down Ctrl on my keyboard and take hold of this top left corner point, and I'm just going to drag this down, and as you do so you can see that shadow behind. I'm just beginning to bring it down a little bit in my frame. Once you've pulled it down a little bit like that, take hold of the top right hand control point, so just take hold of that one and just bring this one down as well. Once you've got your shadow looking a little bit like mine, just hold your cursor beneath and then just begin to rotate your shadow round very slightly, and then just hold down inside and just move this shadow down very slightly like I am. And the idea is we just need to make a really realistic shadow, but at the moment it's looking much too big, so I'm just going to hold down Control on my keyboard again, just bring this point a little bit closer, there we go. I'm just going to make it a little bit thinner as well, so just going to make that a little bit thinner, move my shadow up a little bit. Once you've taken a little bit of time moving your shadow into position by holding down the Control key and just moving these control points, then you just need to shorten the shadow to make sure it's roughly the same length as the player. So I'm just going to shorten my shadow very slightly. That's looking really good. And then when you're happy with your free transform and your adjustment of your shadow, to confirm it, just hit enter on your keyboard. At the moment the shadow is looking rather realistic, but you can see that it's rather harsh in comparison with the shadow behind the football dugout. So we just need to reduce the opacity of this layer. Just go across into your layers palette, make sure that you're selected on the shadow layer, and then just reduce this opacity down to around 50%. So our Subbuteo player is looking fantastic in the image, and our shadow is looking very, very convincing. But one thing we can do just to make it look even more convincing is just remove these arms off the shadow. So to do that we need to use a layer mask, and just go into your layers palette, go down to the bottom and just click on add layer mask icon. Just give that little icon a click and you'll see that we've just made a new layer mask alongside our shadow layer. Head across into the toolbox, pick out the brush tool, and then make sure that your foreground colour is set to black. Heading up to your options bar, just make sure your opacity is set to around 80%, and then we need to zoom in on our shadow. Very carefully and very slowly, just run your brush over the shadow and just remove those arms from the shadow there. There we go, we can just see we're removing those very, very carefully, and do exactly the same this side. There we go, I'm just erasing the arms of my shadow there. It's looking very good. And then when you're happy with something a little bit like that, you can just check out your work by hitting Control and minus on the keyboard, and there we go, our shadow is looking even better now. If you want to adjust your shadow at any time, just make sure that you click back on your shadow thumbnail in your layers palette, zoom back in by pressing Control and plus on the keyboard, and then all you need to do is hit Control and T on your keyboard once more to enter free transform, and then you can just muck about with your shadow until you're really happy with how it's looking. And I'm just going to readjust mine very slightly, just going to make that a little bit bigger. I'm just going to pull this control point down towards the right hand side, and I'm going to be quite happy with my shadow that's looking a little bit like that. So there we go. What we've done is we've taken a lovely selection that we've made with the pen tool of our Subbuteo 1 player, and we've copied and pasted him into our final image, which is our footballground.jpg image, and then we've added a fantastic shadow, and it's looking extremely realistic. Now this is the same process that you need to use with all of the other players that you'll find on the Start Images folder on the CD. And as you'll understand, obviously I'm not going to run through the whole process of doing every single player, as I'll be here for minutes and minutes and minutes making my paths and making my shadows. It will take quite a lot of time to make a fantastic looking composite image like this, but if you're patient, take a little bit of time, you too can make some stunning composite images, and it's well worth a go. I hope you've enjoyed watching this pen tool video, and if you want to create fantastic paths and selections, be sure to pick out the pen tool from your toolbox and give it a go straight away. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.